Here is Sailor Studio 450. As a purple, this is very blue leaning and comes with a greenish gold sheen to it. This is obvious in both the writing sample as well as the swatch. The bold blue leaning purple that has no color or tone shift as paper changes. It also doesn't shade much, if any at all. And on non-fountain pen friendly paper, it can get deep into the page, but also does spread a little bit, but thankfully doesn't feather. Sailor inks are pricey, but definitely worth it. With that, if anything about an ink isn't right for you at the cost, you should pass. Just for sheen, I'm gonna pass, but just because of the sheen.
The pen for today is a Diplomat Aero. And now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
We can see here that the tone is indeed very blue leaning in what's going on. It looks like it is mostly blue. Now it doesn't feather, doesn't spread. It does shade slightly. Instead of shade, we're actually going to refer to it as the sheen in this case. I think that would be sufficient. Like when we look at sufficient on the second line, the top of the F's look a little bit darker, but on a different angle, you see the sheen. Just like with that T at the end. If you look at A, the upstroke, just seeing mostly the blue lean. The downstroke, I really see the sheen, but underneath, that's where we are really getting that purple that is purple about this. So mostly blue tone, however, purple lean, great sheen. Looking at the back of the page, we have no problem with bleeding or ghosting, meaning it would be great to continue your notes back here.
Sailor makes more than one ink. So let's take a look at a few other inks from Sailor.
Here is Sailor Studio 960. Here is Sailor Kobe number 46 Museum Gray. Here is Sailor Manyo Sakura. Here is Sailor Studio 670.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here we have the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather. It does spread just a little bit. It does not shade. It does have moments of sheen. So when you see some of those slightly darker, or it's actually much more dark, look at the commas is where you really see it a lot. That's sheen coming through, not shading, but it as a blue with a very slight purple lean, this is very nice. Considering this is a purple with a very heavy blue lean, I'm not as happy on that one. Looking at the back of the page, you see that it does get deep into the paper in a whole bunch of spots, but it doesn't bleed through touching the page underneath. Now, as far as how deep it gets into the paper, if you could write back there, that's an on you question.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Here we see that the tone is quite a bit more blue leaning than it was on the Clairfontaine. Really going to show that purple about this ink quite a bit less. Now it doesn't feather. It has a slight bit of spread. It doesn't shade. It has areas where the sheen is making it look a little darker. Like at the end of a scribe, the downstroke of that D does look a little darker. That's the sheen. It is just not sheening on this paper. Looking at the back of the page, you see that we have no problem with bleeding or ghosting, so we can easily continue our notes back here.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather. It does not spread. It does not shade. It does have some sheen coming through. We can see it with math speak on the bottom with where the T and the H touch or the K at the end. A little bit of the sheen coming through, a little bit of the purple being there. Look at it is, where the cross in that T really is showing that sheen at the top. Same with the I of is, really showing that sheen off there. It stands out against the quad rule with no problem, really making that quad rule disappear into the background. Looking at the back of the page, we have no bleeding, no ghosting, no problem. Continuing our notes back here.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more violet or purple inks.
Here is Tasha Murasaki. Here is Tag Kayona Oto Sakura no Yumi.
Here is Thornton's Violet. Here is Twisby 1791 Royal Purple. All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
Here the tone we see is just a bit lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine, flatter as well as a tone. Now, it does not feather, does not spread, does not shade, does not sheen, does not show as purple at all. It looks blue, and that is because of that extreme blue lean to this ink. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, easily continuing our great notes back here.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page. Here is Platinum Green.
Here is Kaweco Stormy Gray.
Here is Pen BBS number 129. Here is Pen BBS number 184. The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here we see a tremendous difference between the tones. The tone is much lighter, much more blue, very about it, not showing as this is much more interesting. This is very blah, look, it's blue. That's the best way I could describe that. It does have tiny bits of feathering that you're really nitpicking to go after, but it happens as well as in as well. They're tiny, they're present. This paper, in what I'm using, tends to do just a little bit better about controlling some of that. It does spread, which is expected for on this paper. It doesn't spread to the point that you can't use it. It's just that the color is ugh. Shading, not at all, but we shouldn't expect that. Same with the sheen, not present, shouldn't be expected. Looking at the back of the page, you see that this gets so incredibly deep into the paper, but it did not bleed through touching the page underneath. So only the heavy ghosting, which expected with copy paper. No, you can't write on the back. That's your limitation here.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The wet broad of the Diplomat Arrow really shows off the consistent tone and the sheen of this ink. Now, off camera, I went for a dry medium nib just to see how it could affect the ink, and it didn't, not in any kind of way. This is a strong ink and can perform well from any pen, regardless of flow or nib size. So that makes it a dealer's choice. Ink that favorite pen and enjoy.